we're gonna make a WW-friendly curried roasted pumpkin soup with a whole head of roasted garlic, some lime juice, a little chicken broth. It's gonna be very flavorful, very creamy, a little drizzle of coconut milk at the end to really amp up that delightfully luscious feeling of warming roasted pumpkin soup that we're craving as the weather turns chill. I also find that this is a soup that always makes me feel, just because of like the heated spices in it and that little kick of roasted garlic, I find that it just makes me feel really zhuzhed up from the inside out. And obviously being WW friendly makes me very happy too. So obviously this meal starts with a pumpkin, and you have your pick of the litter with pumpkins right now because they're obviously in season. You can choose usually in the grocery store they'll sell a slightly smaller pumpkin, a sugar pumpkin. The benefit of using a pumpkin like that, it roasts faster and it's a bit sweeter. But if you went to the pumpkin patch or have found yourself lucky enough to have one of these gorgeous little buttes, you can do it with one of these too. And I have a little trick for sweetening it up, just taking it like slightly to the sweeter side of paradise, which I think is nice. I think the balance of the curry and the roasted garlic and a little touch of sweetness and the beautifully creamy, luscious puree of pumpkin, it's a winner. Okay, so the first thing you're gonna start with is roasting the pumpkin. Whenever you are cutting a round item, it will help you dramatically if you give yourself a flat surface to work on. So I am just removing the base of my pumpkin. Now that I have a flat surface, it's gonna make it much easier for me to cut what would have been a ball, like rolling away from me as I struggled to get through the pretty tough skin and flesh of the pumpkin. But now I have a sturdy surface. At this point, you can cut this pumpkin up any which way you'd like to roast it. You could, do a little jack-o'-lantern, have some fun with it. I am just gonna get right down the center and begin the surgery of slicing this pumpkin up. Ooh, lovely. I love pumpkin season. I love fall. You just wanna take the stem off, obviously, because we're not that interested in the stem. And now we are presented with just easy little sections of pumpkin to scoop the seeds and just the sort of very stringy bits of flesh out of our pumpkin wedges. If you have the time or you have children who want to do this, go ahead and pull the seeds from this surrounding orange flesh, and you can just give them a quick rinse, towel them off, and then toss them with a bit of olive oil. And you can do a savory combination that I love, and my daughter Philomena thinks this is her recipe, but I'll tell you her recipe. Toss them with a little olive oil, a little garlic salt, and actually a little chili flake. Yeah, she likes this like spicy thing. So delicious, kind of like there's like a pizza note of pumpkin seed going on. Or you can do them a sweeter variation with a little coconut oil and cinnamon sugar. Also quite delicious, another favorite of our family. And if you are not feeling like doing this step of the process, you can just buy pumpkin seeds or pepitas and proceed to that step in the recipe, because the crunchy topper of the pumpkin seed is a really nice addition to this otherwise very smooth, creamy, luscious soup. And I like using all parts of the plant. All right, final section. And while I have my cutting board out, I am also going to quickly prep my garlic for the head of roasted garlic. So roasting the garlic obviously cuts some of the bite that raw garlic has. It gives it a much softer, rounder, richer flavor. That also gives this soup like kind of that slow cooked, rich feeling, which I really like. So all you're gonna do to prep your head of garlic for roasting is slice the top third off. Just be careful when you're doing this because it's a round head of garlic. Ideally, you'd expose all of the individual cloves, but this was kind of a gnarly shaped garlic head, so I'm not getting these guys, and I don't want to lose too much of the other garlic cloves, so it'll be fine. Everything will roast lovely and completely. Tuck it into a piece of either parchment paper or tin foil like this, because you're just looking to sort of trap the heat and have it roast thoroughly. And then I like just a little bit of olive oil on top, and this is just going to help it not burn and flavor nicely as it cooks. You don't need to go overboard. A little pinch of salt, and then tuck it in. Good night, garlic. Into this lovely little package shape. and that is gonna go right in the oven alongside our pumpkin. And for the pumpkin itself, you're just gonna wanna grab yourself, honestly, you can use a baking sheet. You don't need to get a roasting dish like this. I had a roasting dish for my turkey and other things that I, big format proteins and things. And the reason I like some kind of roasting situation like this is you just want a way for the pumpkin to be getting air on all sides. We want the flesh to lose a lot of its liquid, its water content, which can give it a little bit of a less concentrated flavor in the eventual soup. And you want it to sweeten, and you want it to just caramelize its natural sugars. So giving it as much access to hot air as possible is a good idea. I'm going to really and you can use a cooking spray if you prefer, but I'm going to really, really lightly, like we're talking, half a teaspoon, just to grease the skin so it doesn't burn, and give the inside a little tiny rub down with this olive oil. I like to think it gives it a tiny bit of additional flavor, but you can skip this step if you just don't need to have it. I'm just gonna tuck all these pieces here along the edges. You don't need to worry about them overlapping too much. It's a nice open format cooking here. We are ready to go into a 350-degree oven. It could take anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, depending on how big your pumpkin is, depending on how big your pieces are. What you're looking for is to be able to easily stab the pumpkin with a knife or a fork and have it give zero resistance to you, because we want luscious, creamy, fully cooked, very delectable, nicely sweetened pumpkin. One other tip to make sure that you are not going to burn your pumpkin as it does this kind of long cook is to add a little water to the base of the pan. You're looking for about an inch of water throughout. You don't want it touching the pumpkin, just, very lightly coating the base of your pan, and that will just give it a little hydration as it cooks. Into a 350-degree oven where I've set the rack as low down as possible, because this is a big boy right here. And don't forget about your garlic packet. I just tuck that right here on the side. Seal it up. We'll check in an hour. It definitely will take an hour. And beyond that, we shall see. In the meantime, we can keep working on our pumpkin seeds, get those ready to go, and begin building the base flavors of this wondrously vegan soup. Didn't even think about that, but it is. There you go. I went ahead and picked out all the pumpkin seeds. I'm just gonna give them a quick rinse just to get rid of as much of that pumpkin, flesh situation as possible. So just loosen the flesh up like this. Then just go ahead and grab yourself a colander or a sieve. Shake off as much moisture as you can, and then onto a dish towel. This is an important step because you want to be able to grease your pumpkin seeds with a little bit of cooking spray, a little olive oil spray in my case, and have the seasonings really stick. So make sure you take a minute and dry them well so that the water does not create too slippery of a surface. And I'm just kind of squishing them in here. Honestly, a little bit of pumpkin flesh is not a big deal. It all pretty much cooks away. You just don't want a ton of it. Go ahead and grab your same bowl, because why give yourself more dishes than you need to? Just dry it quickly. We could make Philomena's recipe, which we love. But I'm feeling, because this is like a curried kind of soup, we should do a little curry powder and a little cayenne. Really juice up the heat on here. There's no other heat coming through, and if you feel like spicy is not part of your preferred flavor profile, you can totally leave the heat off. But I think that it's going to give like a little pop and crunch and like spicy zing on the surface of this otherwise very creamy and gently sweet soup. So I'm gonna grab my curry powder, my cayenne, and my cooking spray. I'm gonna use some extra virgin olive oil spray just to keep this lovely and friendly on the WW point system. You can use a little olive oil if you prefer, but just lightly coat your seeds. Nothing too crazy. Just giving them a little bit of fat, because these are gonna roast a while in the oven, and you don't want them to lose too much moisture. And obviously it gives it a nice little flavor too. A bit of curry powder sprinkled right on top. Ooh, smell that spice blend, delicious. Obviously gives it great color. And then here's your cayenne. And this is dealer's choice, how spicy you like it. I'm going like a quarter teaspoon to a half a teaspoon probably. Go ahead and give them a quick toss. A little salt, definitely. These are definitely going to be a condiment topper, so we want a little flavoring coming through here. And be careful, because if your curry seasoning contains turmeric, like mine definitely does. You just want to be careful not to let it sit long on your countertops if they're at risk of staining. Beautiful. A quick little spritz again. I love the layers of flavor that we are building here. Sweet, savory, rich from the roasted pumpkin and garlic. Lots of nice salt coming through. I like a soup that eats like a meal, especially on days when I'm kind of just like running around doing a lot and I need something healthy and filling that I can have made ahead. The soup gets better if you let it sit overnight. So if you want to make this the day ahead and just heat it up for a quick meal, delightful. Grabbing a piece of parchment paper just to line my baking sheet, and I will scatter these seasoned pumpkin seeds all over top and just try to get them into a single layer so all these little guys are touching the hot surface. These are going to go on the top rack of our 350-degree oven where our pumpkin is roasting. And just keep an eye on those. They don't take too long, and the difference between perfectly golden brown roasted pumpkin seeds and like burned to a char crisp ones is just a matter of minutes. So keep an eye. I went ahead and pulled the garlic out about 45 minutes to an hour in when it was beautiful and lusciously golden brown like so. We will squeeze that into the soup. The pumpkin stayed in almost a full 2 hours, and you'll see how tender it's gotten. Oh yeah. I did replenish a little bit of the water at the base of the pan just so that it continued to have that ability to steam the pumpkin as it went. And what you're looking for is a lovely fork or knife tenderness, no resistance. Perfect. Okay, so we'll set this aside and let it cool till it is easy to handle. And meanwhile, we will start building the base of this rich, savory, redolent of onion and garlic and ginger curried pumpkin soup. Get yourself one large onion, and we'll put a quick chop on here. And it doesn't need to be anything too precise here on the chop. We are going to blend everything together in a Vitamix. So now with our onions nice and chopped like so, I'm gonna get just a little bit of oil in the base of my pan. And this is, we're gonna build so much delicious flavor into this dish, but keep it WW friendly by really only relying on little bits of olive oil here and there where we need it. I'll use broth to deglaze the pan if it starts to get a little stuck. Lots of flavor coming in with beautiful spices, fresh ginger, fresh garlic. I am gonna throw a date in for a little sweetness, chicken broth, and then just the tiniest bit of coconut milk at the end to give it this really luscious creaminess. Okay, get your heavy bottom saucepan of some time going over a high heat, and I'm just gonna add a teaspoon or two of olive oil here at the base of the pan. You can use coconut oil if you'd like. Just a little something to gloss the base here and help us develop some of that flavor. Then just go ahead and give it a quick toss to let that oil coat your onion and start to sweat out some of that liquid, concentrate the flavor, sweeten it up a bit. Pinch of salt. Meanwhile, we're gonna go ahead and grab about 1 inch of fresh ginger. I'm sure you guys have seen the great, very easy way to trim the skin off ginger, which is just to use a spoon to easily peel away that very delicate skin here on the surface. I get a little head start just with my knife to take off the really woody parts. And then just use your spoon to easily pull away this very delicate skin, like so. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and roughly chop this fresh ginger. Obviously, ginger brings a beautiful hit of naturally sweet, very warming flavor to this soup. Also, lots of vitamin C. It's really kind of amazing for you. Fresh ginger, taking it to the pot. I went a little heavier. I went for like maybe a solid 3 inches of fresh ginger, but that's okay. It is a curried pumpkin soup. Now coming to you with plenty of ginger. And now it is time to add our gorgeously roasted head of garlic. Behold. Yum. Don't lose any. Squeeze it all in. I'm going to turn the heat down just a little, and I'm going to add a little bit of broth to the base of this pan like we talked about. We don't need to add more oil or fat here. Just a little bit of that liquid will ensure nothing is sticking to the bottom. I'm just going to add a splash of our vegetable or chicken stock just to lightly lubricate the base of our pan and continue allowing the onion and the ginger to develop their flavor. And now to sort of melt that roasted garlic even further into the base of this filling, delicious soup. So we are getting a ton of flavor from the onion, the ginger, and the roasted garlic, but I'm also going to add some ground cumin in, some ground cardamom. I love that. It's sort of like cinnamon. It's a spice that on its own doesn't read sweet, but somehow in meals sort of amps up and boosts the sweet qualities. And then of course we have to have some curry powder to make this our curried pumpkin soup. I do want to add our spices onto the sort of hot liquid, hot oil element of this soup building, because I want the spices to really be able to bloom. I want to bring out their maximum flavors. I want them to toast a little bit. That is sort of the difference between tasting spices in a way where the whole soup feels infused by them versus tasting them where they feel like powdery additions at the end of the soup process, which is not what we want. And by the way, quantities of these, totally to choice. I'm gonna go heavy on the curry powder so it really comes through. Maybe a half teaspoon of the ground cardamom and a teaspoon of ground cumin. And you can see it's looking a little tight in the pot here. Tight meaning the spices are really thickly coating our veg and not having as much of a chance to toast on the hot surface of the pan. So I'm adding just a little bit more broth to loosen it up, continue that toasting process and the softening process for the onions and the ginger. Okay, so while the onions continue to cook, let's go ahead and get our now slightly cooled pumpkin separated from its skin so we can use this delicious flesh. And you should really easily be able to lift it away from the skin. It should be soft and easy to scoop just like so. Its flavor wonderfully concentrated, not too much liquid left. Okay, so I have about 4 cups of our peeled roasted pumpkin here. And one thing to keep in mind is even though we roasted it and that got rid of a good amount of the natural liquid, as this cooks again in the soup, it will release even more. So we're gonna add some stock, we're gonna start to build the soup, but we're gonna start with like a little less stock than you think you might need, or water if you don't have stock. Just so that you don't end up with a soup that's too loose. You can always loosen soups up with a little extra water, a little extra broth. It's just annoying to have to condense it back down if you add too much in the beginning. So let's add this in with our now beautifully simmered and toasted spices, onions, ginger, roasted garlic, etc. And you can see I kept it nice and loose down here with a bit of broth just so nothing burned, but everything had time to toast. Adding our pumpkin in. And let's just get that back up to a nice simmer. So I added about 4 cups of pumpkin. I'll probably start with maybe 2 cups of veggie stock here. Chicken stock is great too, and we can always come back and add more as needed. So we've come to the part of the soup where you have a choice to make. If you feel like pumpkin soup should be super savory, no sweet elements, because it's a squash after all, then you don't need to do this. But I happen to think that a little tiny touch of caramelly sweetness goes a long way. So I'm going to add 1 pitted medjool date into this mix. I'm just going to pop the seed out and put these 2 halves into the soup. They will sort of sweeten the whole entire broth base, and then when we puree, everything will come together and it will just be this tiny note of sweet sugar pumpkin goodness. If you ended up using a sweeter pumpkin like a sugar pumpkin, which is really the easiest one to find in grocery stores usually, you probably won't need that, but just because this was such a savory little number, I find this was a good call. We're gonna let the soup simmer about 15 minutes. We want the pumpkin to have a chance to soak up all of that delicious curry flavor and all the other aromatics we added in. Then we'll puree it up and finish it off with a bit of fresh lime juice, coconut milk, and some fresh herbs just to keep it nice and zingy. I let the soup simmer probably 15 minutes, maybe a little longer. Came back, the pumpkin is totally soft now, soaked through with all that broth and delicious flavor. I cut the heat. I'm gonna let it cool a few minutes just so it's not molten lava heat level, and then I will puree it up. But one of the things I want you to pay attention to is just the thickness right now. You can see there's not a lot of liquid on the surface of the soup. It's really nice and just sort of all veg at this point, which means that when we puree it, it'll be a really luscious puree, not too brothy. If you like it brothier, you can always add more broth, add more water, but I want this to be a real like mouthfeel soup that you chew, that you enjoy, that feels very filling. It's the soup that eats like a meal. Time to puree. Soup is still quite hot, so work carefully. One very important thing to keep track of if you are gonna puree a hot soup item like this is you definitely wanna work with a vented blender. So something like this where there's a hole in the top, you can let the steam out. You also want to start on a really low speed when you begin the puree process and then gradually work your way up to a higher speed so that you don't get into explosive territory. So just take a few ladles full and working in batches, we are going to do yourself the favor of keeping a hot towel nearby, and with our speed on low, we are going to start the puree. And gradually increase. And I did let it run a decently long time because I want it really luscious and smooth. The longer you run it, the more likely you have worked through any possible little remaining pockets. Now check this out. Wow. Steamy, creamy goodness. Now, let's get a little coconut milk in here, shall we? Give it a good shake. I'm using a can of light coconut milk. It is going to give us a little nice hit of creaminess, some nice flavor, but not too much additional fat. Let's go ahead and add about a 1/4 cup here, as well as some lime juice. And I like it pretty limey because it makes it taste really fresh and zingy. And if your lime is not giving it up like this one, it's being very stubborn, stab it with a fork and then just use that fork to kind of like toggle back and forth, and it will really help to loosen up all that good juice in there. Let's start with half a lime and see how we like it. We can always add the other half too. When you're making fall soups and stews, and they're supposed to be rich and filling, you don't oftentimes think about like the little bit of acid, the little tang, the little freshness that makes it feel just more memorable. And of course, we're gonna taste it for salt, but let's blend it together first. Let's see how we're doing. Ooh. Ooh, how lovely. Nice and spiced. Disney little salt. Batch 1 into my serving dish. Okay, working through the second batch, and I will say, if you don't have a blender that has a vent in it, just let the soup cool, and then you can use whatever blender you have. And here's how you're gonna finish off this beautiful, rich, fall-ready, healthy and delicious, WW-friendly soup. First of all, we were pretty sparing with our coconut milk, so go ahead and grab a little bit more just to spoon and swizzle over the surface. And then pick your fresh herbs of choosing. I'm gonna use some beautiful fresh mint and a little cilantro. You could definitely just roughly tear this up, especially cilantro because they're such tender, delicate leaves, but I am going to give everything a fine chop so that it scatters beautifully. And we are going to make it rain a glorious party of color and flavor all over the surface of this beautiful soup. First with your fresh herbs, then with your pomegranate seed, although these are not critical, but they are nice little juicy pops of sweetness, and nobody's mad about a pomegranate seed. And finally are quite spicy, quite crunchy and delicious roasted pumpkin seeds with curry powder and cayenne that I am just going to scatter over top here for a bit of crunch and just a little lime zest to finish it off. And that, my friends, is your curried roasted WW pumpkin soup. Okay, let's taste it, shall we? Get ourselves a nice spoonful. See if it lives up to the hype. This soup. First of all, it's so nice to be able to enjoy pumpkin in a savory way. I feel like we don't use it often enough in a moment that isn't pumpkin pie. And this bowl feels healing, restoring, rejuvenating, warming, delicious, all that ginger popping through from that natural heat that it provides, the caramelized, beautifully sweet and creamy roast garlic, all that great pumpkin, of course. I only did the one date, and I will say if you want like a slightly sweeter soup moment, you might want to add another date, but you can obviously do it to your own preference. And as I literally scrape the bottom of my bowl, I'm delighted by two things. One is that the seeds are kind of like a snack within the soup. They're crunchy, they get a little bit tender as they soak in the juice of the soup, but they're also really crunchy on their own, and they have a really nice spice on them that the soup helps to mellow out. And the second thing is that although this is something that is so good for me, all I'm tasting is pure pleasure.